Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to keep making horror stories. Thank you very much. Let's start the story. Emily had always considered herself brave. She lived alone in a quaint two-story house on the edge of town, surrounded by towering trees and dense forest. It was a place of solitude, a refuge from the chaos of her job in the city. Tonight, however, the peace was disrupted by a deep sense of unease. It started with the wind. A fierce howling gale battered the windows, making the old house creak and groan. Emily sat on her couch, the flickering glow of the television casting long shadows across the room. She tried to focus on the movie, but her mind kept wandering to the strange noises outside. A sudden bang made her jump. She muted the TV and listened intently. The sound had come from upstairs. She reasoned it was probably just the wind knocking something over. With a sigh, she decided to investigate, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The stairs creaked under her weight as she ascended to the second floor. The hallway was dark, the shadows seeming to move and twist in the flickering beam of her flashlight. She walked cautiously, checking each room. Everything appeared to be in order, except for the guest room at the end of the hall. The door was ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling out into the corridor. Emily pushed it open, her breath catching in her throat. The room was empty, but the window was wide open, curtains flapping wildly in the wind. She approached it slowly, peering out into the dark, but saw nothing unusual. With a shiver, she closed the window and latched it securely. She turned to leave, but something caught her eye, a small, dirty handprint on the window pane. Her heart pounded as she examined it closely. It was unmistakable, but how could it be there? She lived alone, and no children had been in her house for years. A sense of dread washed over her, but she shook it off and returned downstairs. As she entered the living room, the lights flickered and then went out completely. The house was plunged into darkness, save for the pale moonlight filtering through the windows. Emily's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She cursed under her breath and headed to the basement to check the fuse box. The basement was even darker, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and mildew. She descended the stairs, each step echoing in the confined space. The fuse box was on the far wall, and she fumbled with it in the dark. As she flipped the switches, she heard a faint whisper behind her. She froze, her blood turning to ice. It was a child's voice, barely audible, saying, "Help me." She spun around, the flashlight beam darting across the room, but there was no one there. Her heart raced as she finished resetting the fuses. The lights came back on, flooding the basement with harsh, artificial light. She scanned the room, but it was empty. Trying to calm her nerves, she headed back upstairs. The house seemed normal again, but the uneasy feeling remained. She decided to make herself a cup of tea to calm down. As she waited for the kettle to boil, she heard a noise behind her, a soft shuffling sound. She turned quickly but saw nothing. Then the whisper came again, closer this time. "Help me." Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the kitchen counter. She knew she wasn't imagining things. The whisper was real. She had to find out what was happening. Gathering her courage, she followed the sound, which seemed to be coming from the living room. The room was eerily quiet as she entered. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. But then, she noticed something strange. A section of the wall near the fireplace looked different, almost as if it had been recently patched. With shaking hands, she pushed against the wall. To her surprise, it gave way, revealing a small, hidden door. She pulled it open, revealing a narrow, dark passageway. The whisper came again, louder and more insistent. "Help me." Emily stepped into the passage, her flashlight revealing a steep, narrow staircase leading down into the earth. She hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to turn back, but she pressed on. The air grew colder and damper as she descended, the walls closing in around her. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a small, dimly lit room. In the center of the room was a wooden chair, and sitting in the chair was a small, pale child. The child's eyes were wide with fear, and they stared directly at Emily. "Who are you?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. The child didn't respond, just pointed to a corner of the room. Emily turned the flashlight in that direction and gasped. There, in the shadows, was a figure, tall, gaunt, and menacing. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a sinister smile played across its lips. Before she could react, the figure lunged at her. Emily screamed, dropping the flashlight. She stumbled backward, falling to the ground. The figure loomed over her, its eyes burning into hers. She closed her eyes, bracing for the end. But then, the child spoke. "Leave her alone," the small voice said, filled with a quiet strength. The figure hesitated, then slowly retreated into the shadows, vanishing from sight. Emily opened her eyes, breathing heavily. The child stood before her, their expression calm and serene. "Thank you," the child said softly. And then they, too, began to fade away, dissolving into the air like mist. Emily was left alone in the darkness, her heart pounding in her chest. She scrambled to her feet, grabbed the flashlight, and fled back up the stairs. She burst into the living room, slamming the hidden door shut behind her. The house was quiet again, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Emily knew she had encountered something otherworldly, something she would never be able to fully explain. But one thing was certain: she was not alone in her home that night. From that day on, Emily made sure to keep the hidden door locked, but the whispers in the shadows never completely faded away.